My name is Marcus Sullivan. I'm 42 years old, work as a corporate data analyst for a tech firm in Portland, and up until 3 weeks ago, I thought I understood my place in my family. I was the dependable one, the one who showed up when things got hard, the one who never asked for much in return. I thought that meant something. I thought quiet loyalty was its own kind of love. Then my father died, and I learned exactly how much my family valued all those years of showing up. The answer came in the form of a funeral program where my name appeared in the same font size as distant cousins I'd met twice, while my sister Victoria was listed as the sole surviving child managing arrangements. Not a phone call. Not a conversation. Just my name buried in the back of a booklet like I was some acquaintance who sent a sympathy card. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. I didn't cry when Dad died. That probably sounds cold, but our relationship had always been complicated. He was a self-made man who built Sullivan and Company, real estate development from nothing, turning distressed properties into profitable commercial spaces all over the Pacific Northwest. He was brilliant with numbers, terrible with emotions, and he raised us like we were investments that needed to mature properly. I became the responsible one. Victoria became the charming one. And somehow, in his ledger of life, charm always seemed to appreciate faster than responsibility. The email came on a Tuesday morning, while I was reviewing quarterly reports in my Pearl District loft. My coffee had gone cold, rain was tapping against the floor-to-ceiling windows, and I was deep into a spreadsheet when my phone chimed. The subject line read, Sullivan Family Funeral Arrangements Final Details. I opened it expecting logistics, maybe a request to arrive early or bring something specific. Instead, I got 3 paragraphs of formatted text explaining that seating arrangements had been finalized, immediate family would be positioned in the front left section, and extended family and close friends would occupy the remaining spaces. At the bottom, almost as an afterthought, it noted that the processional order had been confirmed with the funeral director. I read it twice before the absence hit me. There was no mention of me doing anything, being anywhere specific, or having any role whatsoever. I opened the attached funeral program PDF, and there it was in elegant script and carefully chosen photos. Victoria Sullivan, beloved daughter, managing all arrangements. A photo of her and Dad from some charity gala 3 years ago, both of them in formal wear, both smiling like they were posing for a magazine. Then a list of pallbearers that included Uncle Dennis, Cousin Bryce, 4 of Dad's business associates, and 2 of Victoria's friends I'd met exactly once. My name appeared in the standard family survivor section, wedged between a paragraph about Dad's accomplishments and the service timeline. I sat there staring at that PDF for what felt like an hour but was probably closer to 10 minutes. The rain kept falling. My coffee kept getting colder. And something inside me that had been bending for decades finally snapped clean. I called my mother, not because I expected her to fix it, but because some part of me still needed to hear her say it wasn't intentional. She answered on the 4th ring. Her voice, already tired in that way she got when she knew a conversation was going to require effort. Marcus, I'm in the middle of coordinating flowers, can this wait? No greeting, no acknowledgement of what we'd just lost. Just irritation that I was adding to her task list. I kept my voice level measured, the same tone I used in client meetings when the data didn't support what people wanted to hear. I just got the email about the funeral arrangements. I noticed I'm not listed as a pallbearer. There was a pause, the kind that lasts 3 seconds but tells you everything you need to know about where you stand. Oh well, Victoria handled all of that with the funeral director. You know how she is, she's so organized. She thought it would be easier to have people who were, more prepared for that kind of thing. More prepared. I'd helped move Dad's office furniture when he downsized 2 years ago. I'd carried boxes of files up 3 flights of stairs when his building elevator broke. I'd loaded and unloaded a storage unit with his business archives during a weekend when Victoria was at a spa retreat in Napa. But apparently, I wasn't prepared to carry his casket. I said, still calm, still measured. And the seating arrangements? Another pause, this one shorter, more impatient. Marcus, it's assigned seating. There's limited space in the family section. Victoria needed room for some of Dad's close business partners who were like family to him. You understand. I understood perfectly. I understood that 20 years of being the son who showed up meant less than Victoria's need to orchestrate a funeral that looked good for Dad's professional circle. I understood that my mother had probably nodded along to every decision Victoria made without once asking where her son would sit while they lowered his father into the ground. I understood that I was expected to understand, to be reasonable, to not make things difficult during an already difficult time. Okay, I said, and I heard my mother exhale with relief. Thanks for clarifying. I'll see you at the service. I hung up before she could respond, set my phone face down on my desk, and stared out at the rain blurring the Portland skyline. My hands were steady. My breathing was even. I didn't feel angry, not yet. I felt something colder and clearer, like watching a magic trick explained and realizing how obvious the sleight of hand had always been. I stood up, walked to my bookshelf, and pulled out the leather-bound copy of Lonesome Dove that Dad had given me when I graduated college. He'd written inside the front cover in his precise handwriting, "For Marcus, who understands that showing up is half the battle. The other half is knowing when to walk away. Your old man." I'd read that inscription 100 times and always focused on the first part, the validation that my reliability mattered. I'd never really considered the second part, the idea that walking away could be just as important as staying. I ran my thumb over his handwriting, closed the book, and made a decision that felt like stepping off a ledge and discovering I could fly. I opened my laptop, pulled up booking sites, and started searching for hotels in Cannon Beach. Not Portland suburbs, not somewhere I might run into family friends, but the coast 90 minutes away, far enough to be unreachable but close enough that I could drive there and still make it look effortless. The Coastal Haven Resort had availability. A suite with an ocean view, a private balcony overlooking Haystack Rock, a fireplace, and a soaking tub that the photos promised was deep enough to disappear into. The rate was more than I'd normally spend, but I was done being the son who made reasonable financial decisions while his sister charged Dad's credit card for weekend trips and designer handbags. I booked 3 nights starting the day before the funeral, added the breakfast package and the spa upgrade, and felt something loosen in my chest with each click of the confirmation process. Then I did something I'd never done before. I opened my email, found the funeral arrangements thread, and hit reply all. My fingers moved quickly before I could second-guess myself. Thank you for sending the details. I won't be able to attend as I have prior commitments that weekend. Please give my regards to everyone. Best, Marcus. I didn't explain. I didn't apologize. I didn't leave room for negotiation or guilt. I just stated a fact and closed the door. Then I packed a bag, threw in the Lonesome Dove book and 3 days' worth of comfortable clothes, and walked out of my apartment feeling lighter than I had in years. The drive to Cannon Beach was quiet. I didn't turn on music or podcasts or anything that would fill the silence. I just drove through the rain and watched the city give way to forest, then forest give way to glimpses of gray ocean through the trees. By the time I pulled up to the resort, the rain had stopped and weak afternoon sunlight was breaking through the clouds in shafts that looked like something out of a painting. The resort was everything the photos promised. Cedar shingles, huge windows, a lobby that smelled like salt air and cedar wood, and staff who greeted me like I was someone important instead of someone running away. My suite was on the 3rd floor corner unit, with windows on 2 walls that framed the ocean like it was a living piece of art. I dropped my bag, walked straight to the balcony, and stood there breathing in air that tasted clean in a way Portland air never did. Below me, the beach stretched empty except for a few people walking dogs and a couple flying a kite that twisted and dove in the wind. I pulled out my phone, snapped a photo of the view with my coffee cup in the foreground, and posted it with a simple caption. Sometimes the best way to honor someone is to finally do what they taught you. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. My father always said showing up matters, but so does knowing when to choose yourself. I didn't tag anyone. I didn't mention the funeral. I just let the image and words speak for themselves, then turned off my notifications and went inside to take the longest, hottest shower of my life. That evening I had dinner in the resort restaurant, a table by the window where I could watch the sunset turn the ocean copper and gold. I ordered the halibut, a bottle of wine I couldn't pronounce, and dessert because no one was there to comment on my choices. The waiter treated me like a regular guest, not someone in crisis, and that simple anonymity felt like freedom. I was just Marcus, not Victoria's responsible older brother, Not Patricia's disappointing son. Not the Sullivan kid who never quite lived up to the family name. My phone stayed silent through dinner, which told me the email hadn't landed yet or people were still processing it. I didn't check. I didn't care. I went back to my suite, built a fire in the fireplace even though it wasn't that cold, and sat on the balcony with my father's book in my lap. I didn't read it. I just held it and watched the stars come out over the ocean, feeling something close to peace settle over me. The funeral was happening in 2 days. My family was probably finalizing details, arguing over flower arrangements, debating whether the reception should have an open bar or champagne only. And I was here, breathing salt air and finally understanding what my father meant when he wrote about knowing when to walk away. I woke up the next morning to the sound of waves and realized I'd slept through the night without waking once. Something that hadn't happened since I got the call about Dad's heart attack. The sun was already bright, cutting through the gauze curtains and painting stripes across the hardwood floor. I made coffee in the sweet small kitchen, carried it out to the balcony, and watched people beginning their beach walks. Dogs chasing balls into the surf, a couple setting up easels to paint the rock formations that jutted from the sand like ancient monuments. My phone sat on the nightstand where I'd left it, still face down, still silent in the way that meant notifications were piling up behind the screen. I ignored it for another hour, finishing my coffee and then a second cup, letting the morning stretch out in a way mornings never did when I was checking work emails before my feet hit the floor. When I finally picked up the phone, the screen lit up with 37 missed calls and twice that many text messages. I scrolled through the names with detached curiosity, like I was reading a guest list for a party I'd decided not to attend. My mother had called 6 times between 9 and 11 last night. Victoria had called 4 times, then apparently given up and sent a string of texts that started diplomatic and ended furious. Marcus, Mom said, "You're not coming to the funeral? Call me, we need to talk about this." Then an hour later, "This is ridiculous. You're really going to miss Dad's funeral over hurt feelings?" Then finally, at midnight, "You're being incredibly selfish and you know it. I hope you can live with this choice." Uncle Dennis had left a voicemail, his voice doing that fake concern thing he always did when he wanted something. "Hey Marcus, heard there's some confusion about this weekend. Give me a call, let's figure this out like adults." Aunt Lorraine had sent a text that managed to be condescending and guilt-inducing in equal measure. "Your father would be so disappointed to see you acting like this. Family shows up for family, even when it's hard." Cousin Bryce had sent a single message that was clearly meant to sound mature but came across as smug. "Dude, whatever's going on between you and Victoria, maybe put it aside for one day? This isn't about you." That last one almost made me laugh. None of it had ever been about me. That was exactly the point. I scrolled further and found 3 messages from Jordan, my friend from work who'd always been good at reading between the lines of my carefully neutral updates about family gatherings. "Saw your post. Are you okay? Then I'm guessing the family isn't thrilled. Want me to send pizza to wherever you are?" And finally, just that morning, "Proud of you, man. That took guts." I responded only to Jordan, "I'm at the coast. I'm good. Better than good, actually. Thanks for checking in." Then I opened the group text my mother had started with me, Victoria, and Uncle Dennis, read the increasingly frantic messages about how I needed to reconsider and think about what this looked like and consider Mom's feelings, and typed one response. "I've made my decision. Please respect it. I won't be responding to further messages about this. I hope the service is everything you've planned." Then I muted the conversation and put my phone in the suite safe, setting a reminder to check it once a day at most. The funeral was scheduled for 2 that afternoon at St. Michael's Cathedral, followed by a reception at Riverside Country Club. I knew the timeline because I'd been copied on enough planning emails before I became persona non grata. At 1:30, I was sitting in the resort spa getting a massage that cost more than my monthly gym membership. At 2, when they were probably reading some generic eulogy that focused more on Dad's business achievements than who he actually was, I was in the sauna breathing eucalyptus steam and feeling my muscles finally release tension I'd been carrying since the hospital called to say he was gone. At 3, when they were lowering the casket and Victoria was probably crying photogenic tears while Mom clutched her arm, I was floating in the infinity pool watching clouds drift past, and feeling nothing but relief that I wasn't there. I didn't post anything. I didn't send updates. I just existed in my own space, making choices based solely on what I wanted to do in each moment. It felt revolutionary in a way that probably seemed pathetic from the outside, but I didn't care. I had dinner that night at a small seafood place in town, the kind with picnic tables and paper plates where the food was incredible, because they weren't trying to impress anyone. I sat alone with a basket of fish and chips and a local beer, watching families and couples and solo travelers like me all just living their lives without the weight of complicated family dynamics pressing down on their shoulders. When I got back to the suite, I finally checked my phone. The safe's reminder chimed at 8, and I retrieved it with the same energy I'd used to check my mailbox, expecting bills and junk flyers. There were more messages, but the tone had shifted. My mother's texts had gone from angry to worried. "Marcus, please just let me know you're safe. I'm trying to understand, but I need to know you're okay." Victoria had stopped texting entirely, which meant she was either too furious to function or had decided I was dead to her. Based on our history, probably the latter. But there were other messages now, ones I hadn't expected. Grandma Ruth, Dad's mother, who lived in a memory care facility and who I visited twice a month when no one else bothered, had somehow gotten someone to help her send a text. "Marcus dear, your mother said you couldn't make it today. I missed seeing you. Your father loved you very much, even if he wasn't good at showing it. Be well, sweetheart." That one hit differently than the others. Grandma Ruth had always seen me clearly, had always made sure I knew I mattered even when the rest of the family forgot I existed. Jordan had sent a link to a news article about the funeral. Dad's death had made the local business section because of Sullivan and Company's prominence in Portland real estate. The article included a photo from the reception, and I zoomed in despite knowing it would irritate me. There was Victoria in elegant black, looking appropriately somber, surrounded by people offering condolences. There was Mom clutching a tissue leaning on Uncle Dennis. There were the pallbearers I'd been deemed unworthy to join, all looking serious and honored to have been chosen. And there in the background, slightly out of focus, was an empty chair at the family table with a place card still on it. I stared at that empty chair for longer than I should have. Part of me wanted to believe it meant something, that someone had insisted on setting a place for me just in case. But I knew better. It was probably meant for one of Dad's business partners who hadn't been able to attend, or maybe it was just an oversight in the final count. Either way, it wasn't a gesture of inclusion. It was just an empty chair in a room full of people who'd made it clear I wasn't necessary. I set the phone down and walked back out to the balcony. The ocean was dark now, just the white foam of waves visible in the moonlight and the distant lights of fishing boats dotting the horizon. The air was cold enough that I could see my breath, but I stayed out there anyway, wrapped in the blanket from the bed, listening to the rhythmic crash of water against sand. Somewhere back in Portland, the reception was probably winding down. Victoria was likely holding court, accepting sympathy and praise for how beautifully she'd organized everything. Mom was probably exhausted, already planning how she'd tell the story of my absence to extended family, spinning it in whatever way made her look least responsible. And I was here, alone but not lonely, absent but not missed, finally understanding that sometimes the most loving thing you can do for yourself is refuse to show up for people who only remember you exist when they need something. I slept better that second night than I had the first. When I woke up, there was a text from an unknown number sent at 7 in the morning. "Mr. Sullivan, this is Harold Finch, the attorney handling your father's estate. I need to speak with you at your earliest convenience regarding the reading of the will, scheduled for tomorrow at 10. Please confirm your attendance or provide a time we can meet privately." I read it 3 times trying to figure out the angle. Dad's will. I'd assumed everything would go to Victoria, or be split with the bulk going to her because she was the one who'd stayed close, who'd played the role of devoted daughter even if it was mostly performance. I'd expected maybe a token amount, enough to make it look fair without actually being equitable, or maybe nothing at all if Victoria had gotten to him before the end and convinced him I didn't deserve anything. I almost didn't respond. I almost decided that whatever was in that will, I didn't need to sit in a room with my family and watch them divide up Dad's legacy like it was a prize they'd earned. But something in the lawyer's phrasing caught my attention. "Please confirm your attendance or provide a time we can meet privately." Like he expected me to want a separate meeting. Like there was a reason I might not want to be in the room with everyone else. I typed back quickly before I could overthink it. "Mr. Finch, I'm currently out of town. I can be available by phone tomorrow at 10 if that works, or I can return to Portland if my presence is required in person." The response came back within 5 minutes. Your presence is required. The will specifically stipulates that all primary beneficiaries must be present for the reading. I can move the time to accommodate your travel if needed. Primary beneficiaries. Plural. That was interesting. I'd assumed Victoria was the primary beneficiary singular, and I was maybe a footnote. I checked the distance back to Portland, calculated drive time, and made a decision. I can be there by 10. Please send me the address. The reply included an address in downtown Portland, a law office in one of the nice buildings with marble lobbies and partner names on the door. See you tomorrow, Mr. Sullivan. Please arrive 15 minutes early to complete preliminary paperwork. I sat on the edge of the bed, staring at that text exchange and feeling the peaceful bubble of my coastal escape starting to develop cracks. I didn't want to go back. I didn't want to sit in a conference room with my mother's disappointment and Victoria's rage, and whatever other family members had been deemed important enough to attend. But the lawyer's insistence that I be there physically, the phrase primary beneficiaries, the careful formality of it all, it suggested this wasn't just a formality. I called the resort desk and extended my checkout to late morning, then packed slowly, methodically, giving myself time to prepare for whatever was coming. The drive back to Portland felt different than the drive out. The ocean disappeared behind me, replaced by forest and then gradually by the sprawl of suburbs, and finally the familiar skyline of downtown. I'd been gone less than 72 hours, but it felt like I'd aged a year in that time, like I'd stepped out of the current of my life and watched it flow past without me and realized I didn't actually need to step back in. I could just build something new on the banks, something that didn't require constant swimming against a tide that only wanted to pull me under. I arrived at the law office at 9:40, early enough to look professional but not so early that I'd have to make small talk with family members in the waiting room. The lobby was exactly as I'd imagined, all polished stone and tasteful art, and a receptionist who smiled like she was trained to make grieving families feel welcome without being intrusive. Mr. Sullivan, she said when I gave my name. Mr. Finch is expecting you. Please follow me. She led me past the main conference room where I could see my mother and Victoria already seated, both of them turning to look as I walked past. I didn't stop. I didn't make eye contact. I just followed the receptionist to a smaller office where Harold Finch stood waiting. He was older than I expected, maybe late 60s, with silver hair and the kind of steady presence that probably made clients feel like their problems were solvable. Mr. Sullivan, he said, extending a hand. Thank you for making the trip back. I know this timing is difficult. I shook his hand and took the seat he indicated, a leather chair across from his desk that was probably worth more than my couch. Before we joined the others, he continued, sitting down and folding his hands on the desk. I want to prepare you for what's about to happen. Your father's will is going to come as a surprise to your family. I waited, not sure what to say to that. Mr. Finch opened a folder, glanced at something inside, then looked back at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Your father came to me 6 months ago and rewrote his entire estate plan. He was very specific about his wishes and very clear that he expected them to be followed exactly, regardless of any objections. He left you everything, Marcus. The house, the business shares, the investment accounts, all of it. Your mother receives a small trust sufficient to maintain her lifestyle, but the bulk of the estate goes to you. The words landed but didn't quite connect. I heard them individually, understood their meanings, but strung together they formed a sentence that didn't make sense. Everything, I repeated. Mr. Finch nodded. Approximately $4.2 million in total assets, including the Lake Oswego property, his 40% share in Sullivan & Company, and various investment portfolios. He also left you a letter, which I'm instructed to give you privately before the reading. He slid an envelope across the desk, cream-colored and heavy, with my name written in Dad's handwriting across the front. I picked it up but didn't open it, not yet. What about Victoria, I asked. Mr. Finch's expression remained neutral. Your sister receives a one-time payment of $50,000 and some personal items specified in an attached list. Nothing else. The room felt too small suddenly, like the air had thickened. Why, I asked. Why would he do this? Mr. Finch leaned back in his chair. I can't speak to your father's reasoning beyond what he told me, which was that he'd spent too many years rewarding the wrong behaviors and he wanted to make sure the person who'd actually earned his respect knew it mattered. He said you'd understand when you read the letter. He paused, then added more gently, he also said he knew this would cause trouble, and he was sorry for that, but he was tired of taking the easy road when it came to his family. I looked down at the envelope in my hands, at my name in Dad's precise script, and felt something crack open in my chest. All those years of being overlooked, of being the responsible one who never got credit, of watching Victoria get praise for showing up to Sunday dinners while I was expected to show up and fix the plumbing and balance the books and never ask for acknowledgement. And Dad had seen it. He'd noticed. He just never said anything until now, until it was too late for him to face the fallout. Should I read this now? I asked. Mr. Finch nodded. Take your time. I'll let the family know we'll begin in 15 minutes. He stood and left the office, closing the door behind him with a soft click. I sat there alone, holding an envelope that apparently contained my father's final words to me, and tried to steady my breathing. Then I slid my finger under the seal and pulled out 3 pages of his handwriting, dated 6 months and 2 days before his death. The letter started without preamble, just like Dad always spoke when he had something important to say. No small talk, no warm-up, just straight into what mattered. Marcus, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and you're probably confused about why I did what I did. I'm going to try to explain, though I'm not sure I can make you understand decades of cowardice in a few pages. The truth is, I've watched you your entire life be the son I should have celebrated, and instead I let your mother and your sister treat you like you were invisible. I let them take and take from you while giving nothing back, and I told myself it was easier to keep the peace than to stand up for what was right. I was wrong. I was wrong for so many years that by the time I realized it, I didn't know how to fix it without blowing up everything I'd built. When you were 13 and your sister threw that tantrum about not getting the car she wanted for her 16th birthday, you were the one who talked her down. You sat with her for 3 hours while she cried and raged, and you convinced her that the perfectly good used Honda we bought her was actually a gift, not an insult. I watched you do that from my office doorway, and I thought about how much easier you made my life by being reasonable, by being the child who didn't require constant management. I should have thanked you. Instead, I bought Victoria the car she originally wanted 6 months later when she kept complaining, and I never even acknowledged what you'd done to smooth things over. When the business almost went under in 2008, you were 25 years old working your first real job, and you took a leave of absence to come help me salvage what I could. You worked 16-hour days for 4 months, no salary, just helping your old man try to keep from losing everything he'd spent 30 years building. You reorganized our filing systems, digitized our records, found inefficiencies that saved us $40,000 in the first quarter alone. You were brilliant, Marcus. You saved Sullivan and Company, and I paid you back by giving Victoria a job she wasn't qualified for with a salary twice what you've been making at your analyst position, because she needed something to do after her engagement fell through. I noticed all of it. Every time you showed up when your sister didn't, every time you helped your mother move furniture or fix her computer or handle some crisis she could have managed herself if she tried. Every birthday of yours that passed without anyone acknowledging it, while we threw elaborate parties for Victoria's milestone years. Every holiday where you brought thoughtful gifts for everyone and received gift cards in return, if you received anything at all. I noticed and I did nothing because it was easier to let you be the strong one than to address the fact that we were all taking advantage of your strength. 6 months ago I had a health scare that turned out to be nothing, but it made me think about what I'd leave behind when I was really gone. I looked at my life, at my family, and I realized that the person I was proudest of was the one I'd never told I was proud of. You built a career without my help. You bought your own place, made your own choices, lived your own life, and you never asked me for anything except respect, which I failed to give you. Meanwhile, Victoria has a resume full of jobs she quit after 3 months, 2 broken engagements because she can't commit to anything that requires work, and a lifestyle funded entirely by money she didn't earn. Your mother enables it, I enabled it, and we created a monster who believes the world owes her everything simply because she exists. I'm fixing that now the only way I know how. I'm leaving you everything, Marcus, not because I think money will repair the damage I've done, but because you're the only one who'll use it wisely. You're the only one who understands that wealth is responsibility, not permission. I know this will cause trouble. I know Victoria will be furious, and your mother will probably take her side like she always does. I know they'll say terrible things about you and about me, and they'll try to make you feel guilty for accepting what I'm giving you. Don't. You earned every cent of this not through birth or charm, but through decades of being the person this family needed, even when we were too selfish to appreciate it. There's something else I need you to know. About 5 years ago, Victoria came to me asking for a loan to start a business, some boutique clothing store she'd been planning with friends. I gave her $75,000. The store never opened. She spent the money on other things, furniture for her apartment, a trip to Europe, things she wanted but didn't need. When I asked her about it, she cried and said she'd gotten overwhelmed and needed the money for living expenses, and I let it go because that's what I always did with her. Let it go. 2 years after that, she came back asking for $50,000 for another venture, something about becoming a social media consultant. I gave it to her. That business also never materialized. She's been through $150,000 of family money on dreams she abandoned the moment they required actual work. And your mother defended her every time, saying she was finding herself and needed support. Meanwhile, you've never asked me for a dime beyond that salary I should have paid you in 2008 and didn't. The difference between you and your sister isn't talent or opportunity. It's character. She was given everything and squandered it. You were given nothing and built something anyway. I should have said this to your face years ago, but I was always too much of a coward to risk the fights it would cause. So I'm saying it now when I can't face the consequences. I'm proud of you, son. I'm proud of the man you became despite having a father who was too weak to defend you when you needed it. The house in Lake Oswego holds a lot of memories, most of them complicated. I don't know if you'll want to keep it or sell it, and I don't care what you choose. It's yours to do with as you see fit. Same with the business. You know it inside and out from those months you spent saving it, and if you want to take a more active role, you'd be better at it than I ever was. If you want to sell your shares and walk away, that's fine too. This is about giving you options, not obligations. You've had enough obligations placed on you by this family to last 3 lifetimes. Your mother is provided for. She'll have enough from the trust to maintain her lifestyle comfortably, and she has her own retirement accounts beyond what I'm leaving her. She doesn't need more, and frankly, I don't trust her not to give anything extra directly to Victoria the moment she starts crying about how unfair this all is. Victoria gets $50,000, which is more than she deserves given what she's already been given, but I'm not a complete monster. She'll call it insulting. She'll say I betrayed her. She'll probably try to contest the will. The lawyers assure me it's airtight, written when I was of sound mind and body, with multiple witnesses and documentation. Let her try if she wants. It won't change anything. I'm writing this at my desk in the home office, looking out at the garden your grandmother planted 30 years ago, and thinking about legacy. I built a successful company. I accumulated wealth. I raised 2 children. And when I think about what I'm leaving behind that actually matters, it's you. Not the business, not the property, not the investment portfolios. You. The son who showed up, who did the work, who became someone worth knowing despite having a father who was too busy keeping peace to be in your corner. I hope someday you can forgive me for that. I hope you take what I'm giving you and build something that makes you happy, whatever that looks like. You don't owe this family anything, Marcus. Not your time, not your energy, not your forgiveness. If you choose to maintain relationships with your mother or sister after this, do it because you want to, not because blood obligates you. You've spent enough years being obligated. Be free now. Be selfish. Be the person who chooses himself for once. Your old man. I read the letter twice, then a third time, my hands shaking by the end. The paper blurred and I realized I was crying. Not sad tears, but something more complicated. Grief and relief and anger and gratitude all tangled together. He'd known. For years, he'd known exactly what was happening, and he'd done nothing until now, until the only power he had left was deciding who got what after he was gone. It wasn't enough. It didn't fix the lonely birthdays or the family photos. I wasn't in or the 1,000 small exclusions that had accumulated into a mountain of resentment. But it was something. It was acknowledgement. It was proof that I hadn't been crazy to feel unseen because I had been unseen, and at least one person had noticed. I folded the letter carefully, slid it back into the envelope, and put it in my jacket pocket. My face felt hot, my eyes probably red, but I didn't care. I stood up, steadied myself with a hand on the desk, and walked to the door. Mr. Finch was waiting in the hallway, and he looked at me with something like sympathy. "Ready?" he asked. I nodded. "As I'll ever be." The conference room felt designed to intimidate, all dark wood and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, a table that could seat 20 with only 4 chairs occupied. My mother sat at one end, Victoria beside her, Uncle Dennis across from them trying to look solemn but mostly looking curious about why he'd been summoned. They all turned when I walked in, and the temperature of the room dropped 10 degrees. "Marcus," my mother said, her voice tight with restrained anger, "I'm glad you could find time in your busy schedule to attend." I took the seat at the opposite end of the table from her, putting as much distance as possible between us in the limited space. I didn't respond to the jab. Victoria stared at me with open hostility, her jaw set in that way it got when she was preparing for battle. "You missed the funeral," she said flatly. "Our father's funeral." "Yeah," I said, matching her tone. "I did." She waited for me to elaborate, to apologize, to give her something to argue against. When I didn't, she turned to Mr. Finch. "Can we just get this over with? I have appointments this afternoon." Mr. Finch took his seat at the head of the table, opened his leather portfolio, and pulled out several documents. "Thank you all for coming. I know this is a difficult time. I'll try to make this as straightforward as possible." He put on reading glasses, glanced at the first page, then looked up at us with an expression that gave nothing away. "Robert Sullivan's last will and testament was executed 6 months ago, and has been reviewed for validity and compliance with Oregon state law. It supersedes all previous wills and is legally binding." He paused, and I saw my mother lean forward slightly, eager to hear how her life was about to be secured. Victoria's expression was smug, certain in her position as the favored child. "To my wife, Patricia and Sullivan, I leave a trust fund in the amount of $800,000, to be dispersed in monthly installments sufficient to maintain her current lifestyle, along with the jewelry and personal items specified in Appendix A." My mother blinked, processing. 800,000 sounded like a lot until you considered the full value of the estate. Victoria's expression hadn't changed yet, still confident. "To my daughter, Victoria Grace Sullivan, I leave a one-time payment of $50,000 and the items listed in Appendix B, including certain furniture pieces and artwork currently in her apartment that were purchased with family funds." Victoria's face went blank, then confused, then red. "Wait," she said. "What?" Mr. Finch continued reading as if she hadn't spoken. "To my son, Marcus James Sullivan, I leave the entirety of the remaining estate, including the Lake Oswego property, all shares in Sullivan and Company, real estate development, all investment accounts, retirement funds and additional assets, totaling approximately $3.4 million after the aforementioned bequests and estate taxes. I also leave him a personal letter which has been delivered separately." The silence that followed was profound. I watched Victoria's face cycle through disbelief, confusion, rage, and finally settle on something cold and calculating. My mother's mouth opened and closed twice before she found words. "There must be a mistake," she said, her voice shaking. "Robert wouldn't, he couldn't have." Mr. Finch removed his glasses. "There's no mistake, Mrs. Sullivan. Your husband was very clear about his wishes. This will was executed with full legal counsel, multiple witnesses, and a psychiatric evaluation confirming his mental competency at the time of signing." Victoria stood up so fast her chair scraped loudly against the floor. "This is bullshit," she said, her voice rising. "He left me $50,000? $50,000? After everything I did for him?" Mr. Finch remained calm. "The will is valid and legally binding. If you wish to contest it, that's your right. But I should inform you that your father anticipated that possibility and included a clause stating that any beneficiary who challenges the will forfeits their inheritance entirely." She turned to me, her eyes blazing. "You did this. You got to him somehow, poisoned him against me." I shook my head slowly. "I haven't spoken to Dad about his will ever. This was his choice." "Liar," she spat. "You've always been jealous of me, always resented that he loved me more. And you waited until he was sick and vulnerable and you manipulated him into this." I felt something cold settle over me. The same calm I'd felt when I decided not to attend the funeral. "Victoria," I said quietly, "I haven't asked Dad for anything in 20 years. Every dollar I have, I earned myself. Every opportunity one got, I created myself. You've been living off family money your entire adult life, and apparently Dad noticed." She lunged toward me and Uncle Dennis grabbed her arm, pulling her back. Victoria, he said sharply. This isn't helping. My mother was crying now, quiet tears that she probably thought were dignified. How could he do this to us, she said to no one in particular. How could he be so cruel? I almost laughed at that. Cruel. It was cruel that I'd spent my childhood being the invisible child. It was cruel that I'd worked 4 months to save Dad's business without pay while Victoria got a salary for a job she was unqualified for. It was cruel that I'd been excluded from my own father's funeral because there wasn't room for me. But leaving me his estate after a lifetime of watching me be overlooked, that was somehow the cruelty worth noting. Mr. Finch, my mother said, composing herself. There must be something we can do. It's not right. It doesn't reflect Robert's true wishes. He was ill, he wasn't thinking clearly. He was evaluated by a psychiatrist, Mr. Finch repeated patiently. Dr. Helen Morrison, a respected professional with 30 years of experience. She found him to be of completely sound mind, capable of making informed decisions about his estate. Your husband knew exactly what he was doing. Victoria had sat back down, her face now streaked with angry tears. You're really going to take it, she said to me. You're going to take everything and leave us with nothing. You get a trust fund that most people would retire on, I said evenly. And $50,000. That's not nothing. It's insulting, she hissed. It's more than I ever got, I said, and watched her flinch. Every time you needed money for some failed business idea or bailout from your own bad decisions, who do you think covered it? Dad gave you $150,000 over the years for ventures that never happened. I got nothing except expectations and obligations. She stared at me. You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about, I said. Dad told me in his letter. Every dollar, every lie about where the money went. He knew Victoria. He knew everything, and he made his choice based on that knowledge. My mother's tears had stopped, replaced by something harder. She looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, like she was seeing me clearly for the first time and didn't like what she found. You planned this, she said. You stayed away from the funeral on purpose so you could play the victim, so you could justify taking everything from your own family. I leaned back in my chair, feeling the weight of Dad's letter in my pocket, feeling the years of being second best settle into something like armor. I stayed away from the funeral because I wasn't wanted there. I got an email telling me the guest list was finalized, and I wasn't important enough to be included in any meaningful way. I wasn't asked to be a pallbearer. I wasn't seated with immediate family. I was treated like a distant relative who might show up out of obligation, so I chose not to show up at all. That's not true, my mother said, but her voice wavered. Victoria handled the arrangements and she was under tremendous stress. There were space limitations. I pulled out my phone, opened my email and turned the screen toward her. Here's the email. You can read it yourself. She didn't look. Victoria shifted uncomfortably in her seat, and I knew she remembered exactly what she'd written, how casually she'd erased me from our father's final goodbye. Mr. Finch cleared his throat. If there's nothing else to discuss regarding the will itself, I have papers for Marcus to sign. There are also some items regarding the transfer of property titles and business shares that we'll need to handle in the coming weeks. He slid a stack of documents across the table to me along with a pen. I picked up the pen, felt its weight and looked at my sister. Victoria, I said, and she glared at me with so much hatred it was almost physical. The $50,000 Dad left you, that's more than enough to put a down payment on something, to actually start a business if you wanted to. You could make something of yourself if you tried. Don't you dare, she said through clenched teeth. Don't you dare act like you're better than me. I'm not acting, I said quietly. I'm just stating facts. I've worked for everything I have. You've been handed everything and wasted it. The difference between us isn't talent or love or favoritism. It's effort. Dad finally recognized that, even if it took him until the end to do it. You're poison, Victoria said, standing again. You've always been poison in this family, always making us feel guilty for being happy, for wanting things, for not being miserable and martyred like you. I signed the first document, then the second, my hand steady. If being happy means taking without giving, then yeah, I guess I never figured out how to do that. Mr. Finch witnessed each signature, his expression professionally neutral. My mother watched me sign away her expectations, watched her vision of how Dad's death would secure their futures dissolve with each stroke of the pen. When you were little, she said suddenly, you were such an easy child. You never cried, never demanded attention. I thought that meant you were content. I didn't realize I was teaching you that your needs didn't matter. Her voice cracked on the last word, and for a moment I saw something like genuine regret cross her face. I looked up at her, pen poised over the next signature line. You're right, I said. I learned that my needs didn't matter. I learned to be small and quiet and helpful, and I learned that no matter what I did, it would never be enough to earn the same consideration Victoria got for just existing. You taught me that, and Dad reinforced it, and I've spent my entire adult life trying to unlearn it. This, I gestured at the papers in front of me, is part of that unlearning. So this is revenge, Uncle Dennis said, speaking for the first time since the reading began. You're taking everything because you're angry. I shook my head. This isn't revenge. Revenge would require me to care enough about hurting them to make that my goal. This is acceptance. Dad made a choice about who he trusted with his legacy, and I'm accepting that choice. What they feel about it isn't my responsibility to manage. Victoria laughed, a sharp, bitter sound. You sound like a self-help book. Next you'll be telling us about boundaries and self-care and all that therapy nonsense. Actually, I said, signing another page, boundaries are exactly what this is about. For 30 years I had no boundaries with this family. You took and I gave, and I told myself that's what family meant. But Dad's letter made something clear. He saw what was happening, and even though he didn't stop it while he was alive, he tried to make it right the only way he had left. I'm honoring that. By stealing our inheritance, Victoria said. By accepting what was given to me, I corrected. There's a difference. Mr. Finch collected the signed documents, organized them into a folder, and stood. I'll file these with the court tomorrow. Marcus, I'll be in touch about the property transfer and business documentation. Ladies, gentlemen, if you wish to collect the personal items specified in the will, we can arrange access to the estate next week. My mother stood slowly, like she'd aged a decade in the last hour. I don't know who you are anymore, she said to me. Maybe you never did, I replied. And that's on both of us, but mostly on you for never bothering to look. She flinched like I'd slapped her, and I felt a small dark satisfaction at finally saying what I'd bitten back for years. Victoria grabbed her purse, moved toward the door, then turned back. You'll regret this. When you're alone in that big house with all that money and no family, you'll understand what you gave up. I stood, buttoned my jacket, and met her eyes. I've been alone my whole life, Victoria. I've just been alone in rooms full of people who were supposed to love me. At least now I'm alone by choice. She left without another word, heels clicking sharply against the marble floor. Uncle Dennis followed, shaking his head like I'd disappointed him, which was rich coming from a man who'd only ever called when he wanted free consulting on his own failed business ventures. My mother lingered at the door, one hand on the frame. Your father loved you, she said quietly. He just didn't know how to show it. I know, I said. He told me in his letter. And that's something, but it doesn't erase the years he stood by and watched you both treat me like I was disposable. She opened her mouth to argue, closed it again, and then she was gone too, leaving me alone in the conference room with Mr. Finch, and the scent of expensive leather and old grudges finally aired. Mr. Finch packed his briefcase methodically. That was difficult, he said. I'm sorry you had to endure it. It needed to happen, I said. Better to rip it off fast than slowly peel it back over months. He nodded, handed me a business card with his direct number. Call me anytime if you have questions or if they attempt to contact you through legal channels. I'll handle any challenges to the will. I took the card, shook his hand. Thank you for respecting Dad's wishes. He was a complicated man, Mr. Finch said. But he was clear about this. He wanted you to have choices he felt you'd never been given. I hope you use them well. I left the building and stepped into Portland afternoon sun that felt too bright after the dim conference room. My phone buzzed immediately, probably family members who'd already been called by my mother or Victoria, already preparing their attacks or their pleas. I silenced it without looking, walked to my car, and sat in the driver's seat staring at the steering wheel. $4.2 million. The Lake Oswego house. 40% of Sullivan and Company. My father's entire legacy. Handed to me with a letter that explained decades of cowardice and a final act of courage. I should have felt triumphant. Instead, I felt exhausted, like I'd been carrying a weight so long I'd forgotten it was there. And now that it was gone, I didn't know how to stand upright without compensating for its absence. I pulled out Dad's letter, read it one more time in the privacy of my car, and let myself cry properly, not the restrained tears from the law office but the deep ugly sobs of a child who'd finally been told he mattered. When I was done, when my eyes were swollen and my chest ached, I started the car and drove. Not home to my apartment, not to the Lake Oswego house that was now technically mine, but back toward the coast. I needed space to think, distance to process, and I needed to not be in Portland where every street corner held memories of family dinners where I was an afterthought and holidays where I was the help. I called Jordan from the road, put him on speaker. "Hey man," he said. "How'd it go?" "I inherited everything," I said. "The whole estate." There was a pause. "Holy shit." "Yeah. My family's furious. My sister tried to attack me in the lawyer's office. My mother thinks I manipulated Dad somehow. And I just got in my car and left." "Good," Jordan said firmly. "That's exactly what you should do. They'll come around or they won't, but either way you need space before you make any decisions." "Where are you going?" "Back to Cannon Beach," I said. "I still have the suite for another night. After that, I don't know. I might stay on the coast for a while. Might travel. Might sell everything and start completely over somewhere new." The possibilities kept expanding in my head, terrifying and exhilarating. "You could do anything," Jordan said. "That's got to be wild." "It is," I admitted. "I don't know what to do with this much freedom." "Start small," he suggested. "Figure out what you want for dinner tonight. Then figure out what you want for breakfast tomorrow. Build from there." I laughed, surprising myself. "That's probably the sanest advice I've heard all day. I'll call you later. Take care of yourself, Marcus. You deserve this, whatever they say." I hung up and drove, the highway unspooling in front of me, the ocean eventually appearing in glimpses between hills. By the time I reached Cannon Beach, the sun was starting its descent toward the horizon, painting everything gold and orange. The resort welcomed me back like I'd never left, the same receptionist smiling as she handed me a new key card. "Extended stay," she noted. "Good choice. Supposed to be beautiful weather this week." My suite felt like a sanctuary when I walked back in, unchanged and peaceful. I dropped my jacket on the chair, loosened my tie, and walked straight out to the balcony. The ocean was calm, barely any waves, just gentle swells that caught the sunset light. I called down to room service and ordered everything I'd been too stressed to enjoy properly before. Steak, good wine, dessert I couldn't pronounce. Then I took Dad's letter out one more time and read the final paragraph again. "You don't owe this family anything, Marcus. Be free now. Be selfish. Be the person who chooses himself for once." I could do that. I could actually do that now. Not just in theory, not just as a momentary act of defiance, but as a permanent change in how I lived my life. The money helped, obviously. Financial security bought options that poverty couldn't. But the real freedom was in the permission, from Dad and from myself, to stop performing the role of the good son, the reliable brother, the person who fixed everyone's problems while ignoring his own needs. My phone buzzed again and I finally looked at it. 17 missed calls. 34 text messages. 2 voicemails. I scrolled through the names, recognizing patterns immediately. My mother's messages started apologetic, moved to angry, ended up desperate. "We need to talk about this like adults. You can't just take everything and disappear. Your father would be ashamed of how you're behaving." Victoria's were pure rage. "Thief. Liar. I hope you choke on that money. I'm contesting this will and I will win." Uncle Dennis tried the reasonable approach. "Marcus, I understand you're upset, but think about your mother. Think about family legacy. Let's meet and discuss a fair distribution." Aunt Lorraine went straight for guilt. "Your grandmother would be heartbroken to see the family torn apart like this. Is money really worth losing everyone who loves you?" I read them all with the detachment of someone reading reviews of a movie they'd never see. These weren't messages from people who cared about me. These were messages from people who were angry their expectations hadn't been met, who'd assumed I'd be who I'd always been, quietly accepting whatever scraps they offered. The only message that gave me pause was from Grandma Ruth's nurse. "Hi Marcus, Ruth asked me to tell you she's proud of you. She said your father finally did right by you and she hopes you find peace with it. She loves you very much." I saved that one, deleted all the others without responding, and blocked my mother's number, Victoria's number, and Uncle Dennis's. I hesitated over Aunt Lorraine's, then blocked her too. If they wanted to reach me, they could go through Mr. Finch. I was done being accessible to people who only valued me when I was useful. Room service arrived with enough food for 3 people, and I ate slowly on the balcony, watching the sky cycle through its sunset colors. The steak was perfect, the wine was smooth, and the dessert was some kind of chocolate thing that probably had a French name and tasted like happiness. When I was done, full and slightly wine-drunk, I did something I hadn't done in years. I opened my laptop and started looking at places I'd always wanted to visit but never had, because I was too busy being available for family emergencies. New Zealand, Japan, Iceland, Portugal. With the estate settled and no one depending on me, I could actually go. I could take 3 months, 6 months, a year if I wanted. I could work remotely or not work at all for a while. The business shares would generate passive income. The investments Dad had carefully built would continue growing. I could, for the first time in my life, be impractical. I bookmarked a tour company in New Zealand, a ryokan in Kyoto, a Northern Lights expedition in Iceland. Then I looked at real estate listings, not in Portland but in smaller coastal towns, places where I could have space and quiet and an ocean view. Places where no one knew me as the Sullivan kid who never quite measured up to his sister. I could be just Marcus, whoever that turned out to be when I wasn't defined by my family's dysfunction. The possibilities stretched out like the ocean in front of me. Vast and a little frightening but mostly exciting. That night I slept with the balcony. Doors open, letting the sound of waves fill the suite. I dreamed about nothing important, just fragments of color and motion, and woke up feeling more rested than I had in months. I spent the morning walking the beach, shoes in hand, pants rolled up, letting the cold water wash over my feet. I passed families building sandcastles, couples walking hand in hand, solo travelers like me who'd come to the coast for whatever reasons brought people to edges of continents. Around noon, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, then decided to risk it. Marcus Sullivan, I said. Mr. Sullivan, this is Amanda Chun from the Portland Business Journal. I'm writing a piece about your father's legacy and the succession at Sullivan & Company. I was hoping to get a comment from you as the new majority shareholder. I stopped walking, stood ankle-deep in surf. How did you get this number? Public record, she said apologetically. I know this is a difficult time, but our readers are very interested in the future direction of the company. Your father was a prominent figure in Portland real estate. I considered hanging up, then decided this was as good a time as any to start shaping my own narrative. You can write that I'm honored by my father's trust, and I'm taking time to carefully consider the company's future. Any decisions about Sullivan & Company will be made thoughtfully, and with the best interests of our employees and clients in mind. That's all I'm prepared to say right now. There was a pause, the sound of typing. Can you comment on reports that other family members are contesting the will? That's between them and their lawyers, I said. I'm focused on moving forward, not looking back. Is it true you didn't attend your father's funeral? I felt a flash of anger, tamped it down. My relationship with my father was complex and private. How I chose to honor him is personal. Now if you'll excuse me, I have nothing further to add. I hung up before she could ask another question. So it was starting, the public scrutiny, the gossip, the narrative that would paint me as either the wrong son or the greedy brother depending on who told the story. I walked back to the resort, returned to my suite, and made a decision. I wasn't going to hide. I wasn't going to apologize. I was going to live my life visibly and unapologetically, and people could think whatever they wanted. I opened my laptop and sent an email to Sullivan & Company's board of directors, introducing myself formally as the new majority shareholder and requesting a meeting in 2 weeks to discuss the company's direction. Then I emailed Mr. Finch and asked him to put the Lake Oswego house on the market. I didn't want to live in that museum of bad memories, didn't want to walk through rooms where I'd been invisible. Better to sell it, take the money, and build something new somewhere else. I spent the afternoon researching property managers for the rental properties Dad owned, financial advisors who could help me understand the investment portfolios, accountants who specialized in estate management. I was inheriting a complex web of assets and responsibilities, and I needed to understand all of it before making major decisions. By evening I had a plan. I'd stay on the coast for another week, giving myself space to decompress and think clearly. Then I'd return to Portland, meet with the Sullivan & Company board, assess what staying involved with the business would look like versus selling my shares. I'd interview property managers and accountants, get the Lake Oswego house listed, and start the process of disentangling myself from the physical remnants of my family's history. And then, once everything was organized and stable, I'd travel. I'd take the trip I'd always wanted, see the places I'd only looked at in photographs, and figure out who Marcus Sullivan was when he wasn't defined by what his family needed him to be. I ordered dinner in the resort restaurant that night, sat at the same window table I'd had before, and raised a glass of wine to my reflection in the darkening window. To Dad I said quietly, for finally seeing me, for trying to make it right even if the timing sucked, and to me for finally being selfish enough to accept it. The waiter passed and gave me a curious look, probably wondering if I was toasting myself or talking to ghosts. Maybe both, I thought. Maybe that's what inheritance really was, ghosts and futures tangled together. The past trying to influence what came next. My phone buzzed with an email from Mr. Finch. The business journal contacted me for comment. I gave them the standard statement about the will being valid and legally sound. Thought you should know they're running a story tomorrow. I wrote back a quick thanks and turned off my phone again. Let them run their story. Let Victoria give whatever interviews she wanted, painting herself as the victim. The truth was in legal documents and bank accounts, and a letter written by a dying man who finally found the courage to be honest. Everything else was just noise. The next morning I checked out of the resort and drove back to Portland. But this time I didn't feel like I was returning to a place that held power over me. I was returning on my terms with my own resources to handle my own business. I stopped at my apartment first, collected mail and watered plants that had somehow survived my absence, then drove to Lake Oswego to see the house that was now mine to sell. It looked the same as always, impressive and cold. The kind of house that appeared in real estate magazines but never felt like a home. I let myself in with the key Mr. Finch had given me, walked through rooms full of expensive furniture and family photos that told a carefully curated story of Sullivan family happiness. There was the photo from Victoria's college graduation, all of us smiling like we were proud. There was the one from some Christmas years ago, matching sweaters and fake snow. There was Dad in his office looking important and successful. But there were no photos of me alone. No celebration of my achievements, no visual evidence that I'd ever been more than an extra in their family narrative. I pulled out my phone and called a real estate agent I'd researched. This is Marcus Sullivan. I have a property in Lake Oswego I'd like to list as soon as possible. She knew the address, knew the value, and agreed to meet me there the next day to discuss staging and pricing. Then I called a donation company and arranged for them to remove all the furniture and personal items I didn't want. Victoria could have her specified pieces. Mom could have her jewelry and whatever else the will promised. Everything else was going to people who actually needed it. I spent an hour walking through the house, remembering and releasing, letting each room tell me its story one last time before I closed that chapter. The kitchen where I'd cooked family dinners no one thanked me for. The living room where I'd sat through holidays feeling invisible. Dad's office where he'd built his empire while somehow never seeing his son. I felt nothing but relief at the thought of someone else living here. Some family who might actually be happy within these walls. By the time I left, locking the door behind me, I felt lighter. Like I'd set down a burden I'd been carrying so long I'd forgotten it wasn't part of my body. The meeting with Sullivan and Company's board went better than expected. They were nervous about transition, worried about stability, but I came prepared with research and questions that showed I understood the business. I made it clear I wasn't there to disrupt or destroy what Dad had built, but I also wasn't going to be a silent partner who rubber-stamped decisions. If I kept my shares, I'd be involved meaningfully. If I decided to sell, I'd make sure it was to someone who would honor the company's legacy and protect its employees. They respected that, or at least they acted like they did. Over the next 2 weeks, I organized my inheritance with the same methodical attention I'd given to every project in my career. I hired a financial advisor who specialized in sudden wealth, an accountant who understood complex estates, and a property manager who could handle Dad's rental portfolio. I met with Mr. Finch 3 more times, signing papers and reviewing trusts and making sure every detail was documented and legal. And through it all, my phone stayed silent of family contact, which told me they'd either accepted reality or were regrouping for another assault. The house sold in 4 days for $50,000 over asking. Apparently, Lake Oswego estates didn't stay on the market long, especially ones in move-in condition with established gardens and good school districts. I took the check from closing, deposited it with everything else, and watched my bank account display numbers I'd never imagined having. It should have felt surreal, and it did, but it also felt earned in a way that had nothing to do with money and everything to do with finally being valued for who I'd always been. 3 weeks after the will reading, I booked a flight to New Zealand. 3 months, maybe 6, maybe longer. I arranged for my apartment to be sublet, my mail to be forwarded to Mr. Finch's office, my life to be paused while I figured out what came next. The night before I left, I visited Grandma Ruth at her memory care facility. She was having a good day, recognized me immediately, and held my hand while I told her about Dad's letter and the inheritance and my plans to travel. "He always loved you," she said, her voice soft with age. "He just didn't know how to show it past all his own damage. His father was hard on him, you know. Taught him that love was performance, that nothing was ever good enough. He passed that to Victoria, always pushing her to be perfect, and he passed something different to you, always assuming you were fine because you didn't demand attention. Neither was right. I know," I said. "But he tried to fix it at the end. That counts for something." She patted my hand. "You take that money and that freedom and you build a life that makes you happy, sweetheart. Don't spend 1 minute feeling guilty. The best revenge on a painful past is a joyful future." I kissed her forehead, promised to send postcards, and left before I could cry in front of her. She was the only one who'd always seen me clearly, the only one who'd never asked me to be smaller or quieter or more convenient, the only one whose blessing I actually needed. The morning I left for the airport, my phone buzzed one last time with a message from an unknown number. I opened it carefully, ready to block if it was family using a borrowed phone. Instead, it was Jordan. "Safe travels, man. Send photos. Make bad decisions. Live the life you should have been living all along. Proud of you." I smiled, sent back a thumbs up, and turned off my phone. Then I drove to the airport, checked my bag, and walked through security toward a gate that would take me somewhere I'd never been. To a future I got to choose, finally free of the weight of being the son who was never quite enough. The flight to Auckland was 14 hours of suspended reality, time measured in meals I didn't want and movies I couldn't focus on. I had a window seat in business class, another luxury I'd never allowed myself before, and I spent most of those hours staring at clouds and ocean far below, thinking about nothing and everything. Somewhere over the Pacific, it hit me that I was actually doing this, actually leaving behind everything familiar to chase something I couldn't even name yet. Freedom, maybe. Or just the possibility of becoming someone other than the Marcus Sullivan who'd spent 4 decades being invisible. We landed in the early morning, and New Zealand greeted me with air that smelled clean and unfamiliar, a sky so blue it hurt to look at, and the pleasant disorientation of being somewhere entirely new. I collected my bag, cleared customs, and took a shuttle to the hotel I'd booked in the city center. The receptionist was cheerful in that way people are when they love where they live, asking if this was my first time in New Zealand, telling me about restaurants I should try and day trips I shouldn't miss. I nodded and smiled and felt the last threads connecting me to Portland start to dissolve. My room overlooked the harbor, boats bobbing in water that reflected the morning light like shattered glass. I unpacked slowly, hanging clothes in the closet and arranging toiletries in the bathroom, small acts of settling that made this temporary space feel almost like mine. Then I sat on the bed, jet-lagged and buzzing with exhaustion and adrenaline, and checked my phone. I turned it back on during the layover in Los Angeles, long enough to send Jordan a quick message that I'd made it safely, then turned it off again. Now I scrolled through the notifications that had accumulated during my digital silence. Mr. Finch had sent an email confirming that the Lake Oswego house closing had been finalized and the funds transferred to my account. He also noted that Victoria had officially filed to contest the will, exactly as predicted, and that he'd already submitted the response paperwork that would likely get her challenge dismissed. "Please don't worry about this," he wrote. "It's a Hail Mary attempt with no legal merit. Enjoy your travels. I'll handle everything here." There were 3 more messages from my mother, each one a different flavor of manipulation. The first was anger disguised as concern. "I don't know where you've gone, but this is childish. We're your family and we deserve to discuss this face to face." The second was pure guilt. "Your grandmother is asking for you. She doesn't understand why you've disappeared. She thinks something happened to you. And the third was almost philosophical. I've been thinking about when you were little how self-sufficient you always were. I wonder now if that was nature or if we made you that way by not paying enough attention. Either way, I'm sorry. Call me when you're ready. That last one was probably meant to be touching, maybe even represented genuine reflection on her part, but all I felt reading it was tired. Sorry didn't fix decades of preferential treatment. Sorry didn't give me back birthdays no one remembered or achievements no one celebrated. Sorry was just a word people used when they realized the consequences of their actions were finally affecting them. I didn't respond. I didn't block her like I had the others, but I didn't engage either. I just let the message sit there, read and unanswered, and moved on to planning my first day in a country where no one knew my family history. I spent that first week in Auckland wandering like a ghost, jet-lagged and unmoored, learning the rhythm of a place that operated on different assumptions than anywhere I'd lived before. People here seemed friendlier, more willing to strike up conversations with strangers, less rushed despite living in the country's largest city. I hiked up volcanic cones that offered 360-degree views of harbors and islands. I took a ferry to Waiheek and spent an afternoon tasting wine at vineyards where the staff treated me like a regular instead of a tourist. I ate fish and chips on the beach and walked along black sand shores that felt like another planet. And slowly, in small increments I barely noticed, I started to relax. My shoulders dropped from where they'd been permanently tensed near my ears. My jaw unclenched. I slept through nights without waking at 3 in the morning replaying family arguments or composing responses to accusations I'd never send. I stopped checking my phone compulsively, waiting for the next crisis or demand. I just existed in my body in this place, without the constant background noise of obligation and resentment that had been the soundtrack of my life for so long I'd stopped hearing it. After a week in Auckland, I rented a car and drove south, following the coast through small towns with Maori names I practiced pronouncing. I stayed in bed and breakfasts run by couples who'd retired early to live by the ocean, in hostels full of backpackers half my age who didn't care that I was older and alone, in one surprisingly luxurious lodge where I was the only guest and the owner cooked me a 4-course dinner we ate together while discussing local conservation efforts. Each place I stayed added another layer of distance between me and the life I'd left behind. In Rotorua, I soaked in thermal pools that smelled like sulfur and were supposed to have healing properties. In Taupo, I stood at the edge of a massive lake formed in a volcanic crater and felt appropriately small against the scale of geological time. In Wellington, I spent 3 days in museums and cafes, watching government workers on lunch breaks and students sprawled on grass and buskers playing instruments I couldn't name. I was anonymous in the best possible way, just another traveler passing through. No family legacy or inheritance drama or complicated history following me around. One evening in Wellington, I sat in a bar that overlooked the harbor and started talking to the bartender, a woman named Kate who had that particular brand of friendliness that comes from hearing hundreds of people's stories without judgment. She asked where I was from, what brought me to New Zealand, the usual traveler small talk. I gave her the sanitized version at first, just said I was taking some time off work to travel, but something about the atmosphere, the wine, the distance from everything familiar made me tell her more. I came into some money recently, I said. An inheritance. And I decided to use it to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be who my family needed me to be. She nodded like that made perfect sense. That's a good reason to travel. Gets you outside your own head, shows you there are other ways to live. Did you figure it out yet? Who you are? I laughed. Not yet. But I think I'm starting to figure out who I'm not, which feels like progress. She poured me another glass of wine, waved away my attempt to pay. This one's on the house for honesty. Most people who come through here are either running away from something or running toward something, and they usually won't admit which. You seem like you're doing both. I raised my glass to her. That's probably the most accurate thing anyone said about me in months. From Wellington I took the ferry across to the South Island, standing on the deck as we cut through the Marlborough Sounds, watching dolphins race the boat and seabirds wheel overhead. The South Island felt wilder, less populated, the mountains more dramatic and the distances more vast. I drove through Marlborough wine country, stopped at cellar doors where winemakers poured tastings and told stories about vintages and soil composition with the passion of people doing exactly what they loved. I bought bottles I'd never be able to replace, wines that would only ever exist in this moment, this place, this version of my life. In Queenstown, I did things I would never have done 6 months ago. I went bungee jumping off a bridge over a turquoise river, feeling my stomach drop and my voice rip out of me in a scream that was equal parts terror and exhilaration. I took a helicopter to a glacier and walked across ancient ice that creaked and groaned under my feet. I went paragliding, launching off a mountain and soaring over a lake so blue it didn't look real. The instructor behind me asking if I was okay and me laughing because I was better than okay. I was alive in a way I'd never let myself be before. Each adventure felt like shedding another layer of the person I'd been forced to become. The responsible one who never took risks. The reliable one who always had a backup plan. The boring one who saved money instead of spending it on experiences. I was being irresponsible in the best possible way, and it felt like breathing after being underwater for decades. I posted photos occasionally, not to prove anything to anyone but just because the landscapes were too beautiful not to share. Mountains reflected in perfect mirror lakes. Sunset over wineries. The view from a helicopter with glaciers stretching to the horizon. Jordan commented on most of them with variations of living your best life and you look happy, which was probably the highest compliment anyone could give. A few other friends from work chimed in occasionally, people I'd kept at arm's length for years because I never knew when I'd need to drop everything for a family emergency. They seemed genuinely glad to see me doing well, and I felt a pang of regret for all the friendships I'd never fully developed because I was too busy being available to people who didn't appreciate it. One morning in Wanaka, sitting in a cafe with a flat white and a view of mountains, my phone rang with a Portland number I didn't recognize. I almost didn't answer, then decided I was far enough away geographically and emotionally that whatever it was couldn't touch me. "This is Marcus," I said. "Mr. Sullivan, it's Amanda Chan from the Business Journal again. I wanted to follow up on a few things for the article I'm writing." I took a sip of coffee, watched a family of ducks waddle past the cafe window. "I told you before I had nothing to add." "I know, and I respect that, but your sister gave an interview yesterday and made some serious allegations. I thought you might want to respond." My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice level. "What kind of allegations?" "She claims you manipulated your father while he was ill, that you isolated him from family and convinced him to change his will under duress. She's produced witnesses who say you were at his house frequently in his final months, and that you prevented her from visiting during that time." I almost laughed. I hadn't been to the Lake Oswego house more than 3 times in the year before Dad died. And 2 of those were for holiday dinners where Victoria held court while I helped in the kitchen. The idea that I'd been there frequently enough to manipulate anyone was absurd. "None of that is true," I said calmly. "I saw my father the same amount I always did, which is to say rarely. I didn't prevent anyone from visiting him. I didn't even know his health was deteriorating until the week before he died because no one told me. You can verify all of this through hospital records and his home care staff. I wasn't involved in any of his end-of-life care or decisions. Can you provide contact information for those witnesses?" Amanda asked, and I could hear her typing. "Talk to Harold Finch, his estate attorney. He has all the documentation you need, including medical records proving Dad was competent when he changed his will and statements from the staff about who was actually visiting and when. I'm not going to engage in a he said she said with my sister through the media. The facts speak for themselves." There was a pause. "For what it's worth," she said, "off the record, her story has some holes. The timeline she's giving doesn't match what other people are saying. I'm trying to be fair here." "I appreciate that," I said. "But I'm not going to defend myself against accusations that are demonstrably false. Print what you want. I'm in New Zealand right now living my life, and that's all I have to say." I hung up before she could ask another question, set my phone face down on the table, and took a long breath. So Victoria was escalating, trying to win in the court of public opinion what she couldn't win in actual court. It was predictable, and it didn't surprise me, but it still felt like a violation of something I couldn't quite name. I called Mr. Finch from the cafe, not caring about the international charges. He answered on the second ring, his voice carrying that professional calm that probably cost $300 an hour. "Marcus, good to hear from you. How's New Zealand?" "It's good until the Business Journal called me about Victoria's interview." He sighed. "I saw that this morning. It's unfortunate but not unexpected. She's trying to create grounds for her will contest by establishing a narrative of undue influence. It won't work. We have ironclad documentation of your father's competency and the timeline of his decision-making. The home care staff have already provided statements confirming you were barely present during his final months. So I don't need to do anything, I asked. Nothing at all. Don't engage with the media. Don't respond to her accusations. Just let the legal process handle it. These things tend to make a lot of noise and go nowhere. The article will run, some people will believe her version, most people will forget about it in a week. You're not a public figure. This isn't actually news beyond Portland business circles. That helped, knowing I didn't need to defend myself publicly or come home to handle this in person. Just make sure my name stays clear, I said. I don't care what she says about me personally, but I won't have her claiming I manipulated a dying man. Your reputation is secure, Mr. Finch assured me. The documentation is too strong. Enjoy your travels and let me handle this. I hung up feeling unsettled but not panicked. Victoria could spin whatever story she wanted. The truth was in legal documents and witness statements and a letter from our father that explained his reasoning in his own words. Eventually, her narrative would collapse under the weight of facts, and she'd move on to whatever new grievance or victim story sustained her. I just needed to stay out of her way and keep living my life. I spent another month in New Zealand, working my way down the South Island's west coast, through Fiordland where mountains fell straight into the sea and waterfalls appeared out of nowhere after rain. I took a boat through Milford Sound on a day when clouds hung low, and the whole landscape looked like something from a fantasy movie. I hiked the Routeburn Track, 3 days of walking through alpine passes and beech forests, sleeping in huts with other hikers who shared food and stories without asking intrusive questions about why anyone was there. On that hike, I met a couple from Germany, maybe 10 years older than me, who were taking a year off to travel after their kids had gone to university. They asked the usual questions over dinner in the hut, where I was from, what I did, how long I was traveling. I gave them the broad strokes, said I was taking time off after coming into an inheritance, figuring out what I wanted to do next. The husband, Klaus, nodded thoughtfully. That's a good problem to have, the freedom to choose. Most people never get that chance. His wife, Ingrid, asked what I was learning about myself out here. That question caught me off guard, made me really think instead of giving a reflexive answer. I'm learning that I spent most of my life being who other people needed me to be, I said slowly. And I'm trying to figure out who I actually am underneath all that conditioning. It's harder than I expected. She smiled. That's because you can't think your way to that answer. You have to live your way to it. Do things you've never done, go places that challenge you, let yourself be uncomfortable. The person you really are shows up in those moments. We hiked together the next day, and they told me about their life in Hamburg, their kids who were pursuing their own dreams now, the decision to spend money on experiences instead of leaving a bigger inheritance. Life is short, Klaus said as we climbed toward Harris Saddle. We worked hard, saved responsibly, and now we're spending it while we can enjoy it. The kids will be fine. They don't need our money as much as they need our example of how to live fully. That stuck with me, the idea that the best thing you could give the next generation wasn't money but permission to live on their own terms. From New Zealand I flew to Australia, spent 2 weeks exploring Sydney and Melbourne, then headed to Japan for a month that felt like stepping into a different dimension of existence. Tokyo overwhelmed me with its scale and energy. Millions of people moving through a city that somehow felt both chaotic and perfectly organized. I stayed in a tiny capsule hotel in Shinjuku, ate ramen at 2 in the morning at places where I was the only non-Japanese person, got lost in neighborhoods where no signs were in English and learned to navigate by feel and gesture, and the kindness of strangers who went out of their way to help. In Kyoto I stayed at the Ryokan I'd bookmarked months ago, a traditional inn where I slept on tatami mats and ate kaiseki meals that were works of art. I spent days walking through temples and gardens, sitting in quiet contemplation of spaces designed for exactly that purpose. There was something about Japan's aesthetic of finding beauty in simplicity, of honoring the present moment, that resonated with where I was in my journey. I was learning to be comfortable with silence, with solitude, with not filling every moment with distraction or productivity. One afternoon in Arashiyama, walking through the bamboo grove where light filtered green through towering stalks, I had a moment of clarity so sharp it stopped me mid-step. I realized I was happy, not distracted or entertained or pleasantly occupied, but genuinely happy in a way I couldn't remember being before. Happy to be alone, happy to be unknown, happy to be exactly where I was with no obligations pulling me toward anywhere else. It was such a foreign feeling that I almost didn't recognize it, and recognizing it made me cry, standing there in a tourist destination surrounded by people taking selfies while I had a breakdown about joy. I sat on a bench off the main path and let myself feel it fully, the happiness and the grief for all the years I'd lived without it. I thought about Dad's letter, about his regret for not standing up for me, and I finally understood that he'd given me more than money. He'd given me permission to stop performing, to stop earning my place, to just exist as myself and let that be enough. It was a gift he'd never given himself, trapped as he was in his own performance of success and strength, and maybe leaving me everything was his way of trying to break that cycle. My phone buzzed in my pocket and I ignored it, not ready to leave this moment. When I finally checked it an hour later, walking back toward the train station, I found a message from Mr. Finch. Good news, Victoria's will contest was dismissed. Judge found no merit to her claims. The Portland article ran but was fairly balanced, included my statement through our office. This should be the end of the legal challenges. Congratulations, you can officially move forward without looking over your shoulder. I read it twice, waiting for the surge of triumph or vindication, but what I felt was mostly relief mixed with something like pity. Victoria had fought so hard to overturn a decision that was never going to change, had burned bridges and made accusations and exhausted herself trying to force reality to match her expectations. And in the end, she was exactly where she started, just angrier and more isolated. I didn't feel sorry for her exactly, but I recognized the tragedy of someone so committed to being a victim that they couldn't see the ways they victimized themselves. I sent a simple reply to Mr. Finch. Thank you for everything. I'll be in touch when I'm ready to discuss the business and property decisions. Then I put my phone away and went to find dinner. Some small restaurant where I could sit at a counter and watch someone make perfect tempura while I ate in comfortable silence. Japan was teaching me that meals didn't need conversation to be meaningful, that there was value in sitting with your own thoughts while nourishment happened around you. I stayed in Japan for 6 weeks total, moving from city to countryside and back, taking trains through landscapes that looked like they belonged in paintings. In Takayama, I stayed in a guest house run by an elderly couple who spoke almost no English, but communicated through smiles and gestures, and food that appeared at regular intervals like magic. In Hiroshima, I spent a sobering afternoon in the Peace Memorial Museum, confronting the consequences of violence and the resilience of people who chose to rebuild rather than remain broken. Everywhere I went, I was anonymous but welcomed, foreign but treated with courtesy that felt genuine rather than performative. It made me think about how much energy I'd spent in Portland trying to earn basic respect from people who should have given it freely. Here, strangers gave me directions and restaurant recommendations and small kindnesses without expecting anything in return, and it recalibrated my understanding of how people could treat each other. I started to see my family's dysfunction not as normal family complexity but as an active choice to withhold care and keep score and maintain hierarchies that served no one. After Japan, I flew to Iceland for 3 weeks of dramatic landscapes and long summer days that barely got dark. I drove the ring road in a rented 4-wheel drive, stopping at waterfalls and hot springs and black sand beaches where I was often the only person for miles. I hiked on glaciers and swam in geothermal pools, and watched the midnight sun hover on the horizon like it couldn't decide whether to set. The scale of everything in Iceland, the raw power of geology still actively shaping the land, made my inheritance drama feel appropriately small. One night I stayed in a remote farmhouse that had been converted to a guest house, miles from the nearest town, surrounded by nothing but lava fields and distant mountains. The host, a weathered man named John who'd grown up on this farm, served me lamb stew and homemade bread while telling stories about Icelandic winters and summer sheep roundups and the challenge of making a living in such a harsh environment. "Why do you stay?" I asked him. "Wouldn't it be easier somewhere else?" He looked at me like I'd asked why. He breathed. "This is home," he said simply. "Easy isn't the point. The point is living in a place that matters to you, doing work that means something. I make enough to live, I have my land and my sheep, I meet interesting people like you. What else do I need?" That conversation stayed with me, the idea that enough was actually enough, that you didn't need to constantly accumulate more to justify your existence. John had probably never made a fraction of what I just inherited, but he seemed more content than anyone I'd known in Portland's business circles, people who were always chasing the next deal or acquisition or status symbol. I left Iceland feeling like I'd completed something, though I couldn't articulate what. I'd been traveling for almost 4 months, had seen more of the world than most people saw in a lifetime, Had spent money without guilt and time without obligation. I'd learned that I liked my own company, that I could navigate foreign countries and uncomfortable situations, that I was capable of joy when I wasn't carrying the weight of other people's expectations. But I also felt the pull of wanting to build something, to put down roots somewhere, to move from running away to running toward. I flew back to Portland in late spring. The city green and blooming and somehow both familiar and foreign after months away. My apartment was exactly as I'd left it, my subletter having been meticulously careful with my things. I spent the first few days just walking the city, reacquainting myself with neighborhoods and coffee shops, and the particular quality of light on the Willamette River. It felt different now being back, like I was visiting a place I used to live rather than returning home. Portland was where I was from, but I wasn't sure it was where I belonged anymore. I met with Mr. Finch to finalize the last details of the estate, signing papers that transferred the final accounts and closed out probate. Everything is settled, he said. The house sale proceeds are in your account, the business shares are in your name, the investment portfolios are transferred. You're officially a wealthy man with no legal complications. Congratulations. We shook hands and he asked what I was planning to do next, where I thought I'd settle. I told him honestly that I didn't know yet, that I was still figuring that out. I scheduled a meeting with Sullivan and Company's board to discuss my involvement with the company. I'd been thinking about it throughout my travels, weighing the pros and cons of staying connected to Dad's legacy versus starting completely fresh. The meeting was cordial, professional, everyone curious about my plans but careful not to pressure me either way. I told them I wanted to stay involved as a board member, that I respected what Dad had built and wanted to see it continue, but that I wasn't interested in day-to-day operations. They seemed relieved, probably having worried I'd either sell immediately or try to take over without experience. One of the other board members, a woman named Patricia who'd worked with Dad for 20 years, stayed after the meeting ended. Your father talked about you sometimes, she said. More than you probably realized. He'd mentioned something you'd accomplished or some insight you'd shared. Always with this tone of pride mixed with regret. I think he knew he'd failed you in some ways but didn't know how to fix it. That's why the will didn't surprise me when I heard about it. It was his apology and his blessing wrapped together. I thanked her for sharing that, feeling the familiar complicated mix of grief and gratitude. It helped, knowing that Dad's final choice wasn't impulsive or meant to punish Victoria, but was the culmination of years of quiet observation and regret. It didn't fix the past, but it gave the past a different context, one I could live with more easily. I left that meeting feeling like I'd done right by Dad's legacy, honoring it without being trapped by it. The last thing I needed to do was face my family, not to reconcile necessarily but to close that chapter with intention rather than letting it remain open and infected. I called my mother and asked if we could meet for coffee, just the two of us, somewhere neutral. She agreed with a wariness that suggested she expected either an attack or an olive branch and wasn't sure which she preferred. We met at a cafe downtown, mid-afternoon on a weekday when it wasn't too crowded. She looked older than I remembered, more tired, and I wondered if the last few months had aged her or if I was just seeing her clearly for the first time without the filter of obligation. We ordered coffee, sat at a corner table, and looked at each other across a distance that was more than physical. I'm not here to fight, I said before she could speak. I just want to have one honest conversation before I decide what kind of relationship we're going to have going forward. She nodded slowly. I owe you an apology, she said. I've thought about that a lot since the funeral. Since before the funeral, really. I did fail you, Marcus. I let Victoria be the center of attention because she demanded it, and I let you fade into the background because you didn't. That wasn't fair. I'm sorry. The apology was better than I expected, more self-aware, but it still felt incomplete. Why, I asked. Why did you let it happen? She was quiet for a long moment, stirring her coffee even though she hadn't added anything to it. I think because it was easier. Victoria was so much work, always dramatic and needy and demanding. You were easy. You took care of yourself. And I was tired, Marcus. I was tired from your father being emotionally distant and from managing Victoria's constant crises. You were the one thing in my life that didn't require constant attention, so I didn't give it. And by the time I realized what I'd done, it had been happening for so long, I didn't know how to change it. At least it was honest. At least she wasn't pretending she didn't know what she'd done, or trying to reframe it as something else. I can understand that, I said. But understanding it doesn't mean I can just forgive it and move on like nothing happened. I'm different now, Mom. I'm not going to be the person who shows up for everyone and gets nothing back. If we have a relationship going forward, it has to be mutual and reciprocal. I can't be your emotional support or Victoria's fixer, or the person you call when you need something managed. She looked down at her coffee, tears forming in her eyes. So what does that mean? It means I need space still. It means I'll reach out when I'm ready. It means if I choose to be in your life, it'll be because I want to, not because I feel obligated. And it means you need to accept that I'm allowed to make that choice. She wiped her eyes with a napkin. I understand. And for what it's worth, I am proud of you. I should have said that more. I should have shown it more. You became someone remarkable despite us, not because of us. That acknowledgement meant more than the apology. We finished our coffee with slightly easier small talk. And when we parted on the sidewalk, she hugged me. Briefly and whispered, "Take care of yourself, Marcus. You deserve to be happy." I drove home feeling lighter, like I'd set down another weight I hadn't realized I was still carrying. We might never have the relationship I'd wanted as a kid, but we had honesty now, and that was something. I didn't reach out to Victoria. I didn't need to. She'd made her choices, burned her bridges, and told her story. I'd made mine. The truth was documented and legally settled. We were free to live our separate lives without pretending we had to be close because we shared DNA. Maybe someday that would change, but I wasn't holding my breath or holding space for her in my life. I had limited energy and infinite options for how to spend it, and Victoria had used up her allocation years ago. 6 months after returning from my travels, I made a decision. I sold my Portland apartment, most of my furniture, and everything that tied me to the city beyond the business shares I'd keep as a board member. I bought a house on the Oregon coast, a modern place with huge windows and a view of the ocean. Far enough from Portland that dropping in wasn't convenient, but close enough that I could attend quarterly board meetings without flying. It was my compromise between running away and being trapped, a place that was mine alone without history or expectation. I set up a home office, started doing consulting work again on my own terms, taking projects that interested me and saying no to ones that didn't. I had enough money that work was a choice rather than a necessity, which changed everything about how I approached it. I joined a hiking group and a local conservation nonprofit. I learned to surf badly and paddleboard competently. I cooked elaborate meals for myself and occasionally invited neighbors over without feeling like I had to prove anything. Jordan visited twice, staying in my guest room and marveling at the life I'd built. "You did it," he said one evening as we sat on my deck watching sunset. "You actually built the life you wanted instead of the one you were expected to have. How does it feel?" "Quiet," I said. "In the best way. Like I can finally hear myself think without all the background noise." 1 year to the day after Dad died, I drove to his grave. I'd never had missed the burial because I'd excluded myself from his funeral, but I felt like I owed him this one visit. The cemetery was peaceful, well-maintained, with views of the valley where he'd built his business. I found his headstone, simple granite with his name and dates and the words husband, father, builder. I sat on the grass next to it and pulled out the letter I'd carried with me around the world and back. I'd read it so many times the creases were starting to tear, the ink fading in places. "Hey Dad," I said, feeling only slightly ridiculous talking to a piece of stone. "I did what you said. I took what you gave me and I used it to be selfish, to choose myself, to build something that makes me happy. Thank you for finally seeing me. Thank you for trying to make it right even though the timing sucked. I forgive you for the years you didn't, and I hope wherever you are, you've found your own version of peace." I sat there for a while, not praying exactly but just being present, letting myself feel the complicated love I had for a man who'd failed me in life but tried to redeem himself in death. Then I stood, brushed grass from my jeans and walked back to my car. I had dinner plans with friends I'd made in my coastal town, people who knew me only as Marcus, not as the Sullivan kid with all the baggage. I had a life I'd chosen deliberately, crafted intentionally, built from the ruins of a family that had never known what to do with me. Driving away from the cemetery, I thought about Victoria and her apartment bought with family money, probably still angry, still feeling victimized, still unable to see her own role in how things turned out. I thought about my mother in the house where she'd raised us, surrounded by memories and regrets and a trust fund sufficient to keep her comfortable. I thought about Dad's business continuing without him, his legacy in real estate and property. development still generating wealth and opportunities. And I thought about myself on a coastal highway with the ocean to my left and the rest of my life stretching ahead, finally free to be exactly who I'd always been underneath the roles and expectations. Selfish in the way Dad had given me permission to be, choosing myself not as revenge but as survival, building a future where my name was written in my own hand rather than assigned by people who'd never bothered to read what I was actually writing. The sunset painted the sky in layers of orange and pink and gold, and I rolled down my windows to let the salt air fill my car. Tomorrow I'd wake up in my house overlooking the ocean. I'd make coffee on my schedule and work on projects I'd chosen and maybe take a walk on the beach with no destination or timeline. I'd live another day of the life I'd earned, not through birth or obligation or performance, but through the simple radical act of finally choosing myself. And if anyone from my past ever asked if I regretted how things turned out, if I wished I'd tried harder to maintain those family connections, if I thought the money was worth the relationships I'd lost, I'd tell them the truth. I didn't lose relationships. I freed myself from obligations disguised as love. The money was just the tool that made freedom possible. The real inheritance was permission to stop performing and start living. 2 years after Dad's death, I stood in the conference room of Sullivan and Company for what I decided would be my last board meeting before transitioning to a purely advisory role. The company had thrived under new leadership, expanding into sustainable development projects that felt more aligned with where the industry was heading. I'd voted on major decisions, offered strategic input when asked, and collected dividends that continued to fund the life I'd built without requiring me to sacrifice my peace for profit. The meeting wrapped up efficiently, handshakes exchanged, quarterly reports distributed in neat folders that I'd review later from my deck overlooking the ocean. As people filtered out, Patricia caught my arm gently. "Can I talk to you for a minute?" We stepped into a smaller office off the main conference room, and she closed the door with the careful deliberation of someone about to say something significant. "I wanted to let you know before it becomes public knowledge. Your sister has been asking around about potential buyers for her future inheritance stake." I blinked, processing that. She doesn't have an inheritance stake. The will was settled. Patricia shook her head slightly. "Not from your father. From your mother. Apparently Victoria has convinced your mother to restructure her trust, so that when she passes, Victoria inherits the bulk of what's left. Your mother came to me asking about the company's valuation, whether shares could be divided, that sort of thing. She seemed to think you'd be open to negotiating some kind of split now rather than waiting." The familiar tightness started in my chest, the old pattern of feeling obligated to smooth things over, to be reasonable, to consider everyone's needs above my own. Then I breathed through it, felt it dissolve against the reality of who I'd become. "What did you tell her?" Patricia smiled slightly. "I told her that any decisions about company shares would require unanimous board approval, and that as the majority shareholder, your vote would be decisive. I also mentioned that the company has a right of first refusal on any shares being sold, and that you'd likely exercise that right rather than let outside parties acquire stake." She didn't seem pleased. "Good," I said, surprising myself with how firmly the word came out. "Mom can structure her trust however she wants. That's her choice. But I'm not negotiating or splitting anything Dad left me. He made his decision for reasons that were valid, and I'm honoring that decision. If Victoria wants wealth, she can earn it like everyone else." Patricia nodded approvingly. "I thought that would be your answer, but I wanted to make sure you knew what was being discussed behind the scenes. Your mother seemed to think family obligation would compel you to compromise." "She doesn't know me very well then," I said. "The old Marcus might have felt that obligation. This version doesn't." We talked for a few more minutes about company strategy and upcoming projects. Then I gathered my things and headed out. The Portland streets were busy with lunch crowds, people rushing between meetings and obligations, living the life I used to live before I learned there were other ways to exist. I didn't miss it. I didn't miss the constant pressure or the performance or the measuring of worth through productivity and accumulation. I stopped for lunch at a small Vietnamese place I'd loved years ago, sat at the counter, and ordered pho while checking my phone. There was an email from a real estate agent in Portugal, following up on a property I'd inquired about months ago. A renovated farmhouse in the Alentejo region, land for gardens, close enough to the coast for day trips but far enough inland for privacy and peace. I'd been toying with the idea of buying a second place somewhere in Europe, somewhere I could spend months at a time when Oregon winters got too gray and confining. The photos showed whitewashed walls and terracotta tiles, olive groves and cork trees, the kind of space that invited slow living and long dinners and conversations that lasted until the wine ran out. I could imagine myself there, learning Portuguese badly, buying produce at local markets, becoming known as the quiet American who kept to himself but was always friendly when encountered. It was tempting in a way that would have terrified the old Marcus, the one who needed security and routine and the familiar comfort of the known. I replied to the agent saying I was interested in seeing more details, maybe scheduling a visit in the next few months. Then I finished my pho, paid, and walked back to where I'd parked. The drive back to the coast took 90 minutes, highways giving way to winding roads through forest, and then finally the ocean appearing like a reward for the journey. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the afternoon sun was slanting gold across the water, and I felt the familiar settling that happened whenever I returned to this place I'd chosen. Inside, the house smelled like the sea salt candles I kept burning and the coffee I'd made that morning before driving to Portland. I changed into comfortable clothes, poured a glass of wine, and took my laptop out to the deck. The email about the Portugal property had sparked something. A reminder that I could keep building, keep choosing, keep expanding my life in directions that served my joy rather than anyone else's expectations. I opened a document I'd been working on sporadically, a kind of memoir or reflection on the journey from invisible son to intentional adult. Writing about it helped me process what had happened, helped me see patterns and growth I might have missed if I just kept moving forward without looking back. I wasn't sure if anyone else would ever read it, but that wasn't really the point. The point was articulating my own story in my own words, claiming my narrative instead of letting others define it. I wrote for an hour, the words flowing easier than they usually did. Something about the board meeting and Patricia's warning having clarified exactly how far I'd come, and how firmly I intended to stay in this new version of myself. As the sun started its descent toward the horizon, I saved my work and closed the laptop. My phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. His wife was pregnant with their second kid, and he'd been sending updates about the chaos and joy of expanding their family. Latest update. Apparently 3-year-olds have opinions about baby names, and his daughter was insisting they name the new baby Sparkle Princess. I laughed, sent back congratulations and commiserations in equal measure, and felt grateful for friendships that had deepened once I stopped being unavailable for my own life. Another text came through, this one from an unknown number. I almost deleted it without reading, assuming spam or someone from my past I'd successfully avoided, but something made me open it. Marcus, this is Kate from Wellington. We met at the bar about 2 years ago. You told me about your inheritance and figuring out who you were. I'm in Oregon visiting friends and remembered you mentioned living on the coast. Any chance you want to grab coffee and catch up? Long shot, I know, but I figured I'd try. I stared at the message, trying to remember the details of that conversation beyond the broad strokes. Kate, the bartender who'd poured me free wine and said I was running away and toward simultaneously. It felt like another lifetime, that version of me who was just beginning to understand what freedom might look like. I typed back quickly before I could overthink it. I remember you. I'm up near Cannon Beach if you're in the area. Coffee sounds good. She responded almost immediately with dates she'd be around, and we made plans to meet at a cafe I liked in town. The next few days passed in the pleasant rhythm I'd established. Morning walks on the beach, consulting work that challenged me without consuming me, evenings reading or cooking, or sometimes just sitting on the deck watching the light change. I met with my conservation group to discuss a new project protecting coastal bird habitats. I had dinner with my neighbor Tom, a retired teacher who'd moved here after his wife died, and who understood the value of comfortable silence between people who enjoyed each other's company without needing to fill every moment with words. When the day came to meet Kate, I arrived at the cafe early and ordered my usual before realizing I was nervous in a way I hadn't been nervous in a long time. Not anxious exactly, but aware that this felt like something, a potential shift or opening I hadn't expected. She arrived exactly on time, looking different from how I remembered but also exactly the same, that quality some people have of being immediately recognizable even when details have changed. Marcus, she said, smiling as she joined me at the table. You look good. Different. More relaxed maybe? I laughed. That's probably the highest compliment I could get at this point. 2 years ago I was wound so tight I'm surprised I didn't snap. She ordered coffee and we fell into conversation easily, the kind where you pick up threads from before without needing to rebuild from scratch. She'd left the bar job, gone back to school for environmental science, was working on a research project about marine ecosystems that brought her to the Oregon coast. So did you figure it out? She asked after we'd caught up on the basics. Who you are when you're not trying to be what your family needed. I thought about that, about all the miles traveled and decisions made and relationships released. Think so. Or at least I figured out who I'm not, and that's given me enough space to let the rest emerge naturally. I'm still writing the story, but at least now I'm the one holding the pen. She nodded like that made perfect sense. That's what most people never do. They let other people write their stories and then wonder why nothing feels authentic. We talked for 2 hours, coffee turning into lunch, the conversation ranging from her research to my travels to the strange gift of sudden wealth, and the stranger challenge of using it wisely. She told me about her own family dynamics, complicated in different ways, but with the same underlying theme of having to break away to find herself. When we finally left the cafe, she hesitated on the sidewalk. I'm here for another week doing field research. If you want company for dinner or a hike or whatever, let me know. No pressure. I found myself smiling in a way that felt unfamiliar but good. I'd like that. We exchanged actual phone numbers instead of relying on the dating app adjacent quality of a random text. And I drove home feeling something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not attraction exactly, though that was there, but possibility. The sense that my life was still opening rather than settling into final form. Over the next week, Kate and I fell into an easy pattern. She'd finish her research work by early afternoon, and we'd meet for hikes along the coastal trails or drives to small towns with good restaurants. We talked about everything and nothing, the kind of conversations where you learn someone's mind rather than just their history. She was smart and funny and comfortable with silence, didn't need me to perform or entertain, seemed genuinely interested in who I was rather than what I'd inherited or where I'd come from. One evening we cooked dinner at my place, working together in the kitchen with the easy coordination of people who both knew their way around food. She made a salad with ingredients from the farmer's market. I grilled fish I'd bought from the dock that morning, and we ate on the deck as the sunset painted everything gold. This is a good life, she said, gesturing at the view, the meal, the comfortable space we'd created. You built something real here. I did, I said, feeling the truth of it settle. It took me 42 years and a complicated inheritance and burning down most of my family relationships, but I finally built something that's actually mine. She raised her wine glass. To building lives that fit instead of lives that look good from the outside. We drank to that, and later when she left to drive back to where she was staying, she kissed me briefly at the door. Just enough to be clear about interest, not enough to rush anything. I appreciate you, she said. The whole thing, who you've become, the courage it took to get here. After she left, I sat on the deck for a long time, feeling the night air cool around me, listening to the ocean's constant conversation with the shore. I thought about the Marcus who'd opened that email about tough cuts and funeral arrangements, the one who'd felt expendable and invisible and tired of performing gratitude for scraps. That version of me felt like a different person now, someone I'd shed like skin that no longer fit. I didn't regret him. He'd survived and shown up and done his best with limited tools. But I was grateful I wasn't him anymore. Kate left Oregon at the end of her research trip, but we stayed in touch, texts and calls that gradually increased in frequency and depth. She had her own life and work in New Zealand, I had mine here, and neither of us was in a rush to compress that into something conventional. But there was something there, growing slowly in the space between us, the possibility of building connection without losing autonomy. It felt healthy in a way my family relationships never had, based on genuine interest rather than obligation or need. 3 months after she left, I booked a flight back to New Zealand. Not running away this time, but running towards something I wanted to explore. We spent 2 weeks together, falling into rhythm even easier than we had in Oregon, and by the end of it we'd made tentative plans for her to visit again, for me to come back, for seeing where this could go without forcing it into shapes that didn't fit. On my last night there, lying in her small apartment in Wellington with the harbor lights visible through the window, she asked if I was happy. Yeah, I said, surprising myself with how quickly and certainly the answer came. I really am. Not in the everything is perfect way, but in the I built a life that actually fits me way. That's rare, she said. Most people spend their whole lives trying to fit into lives that were designed for someone else. I kissed her forehead. I almost did that too. I'm glad I figured out there was another option. Flying home from that trip, I thought about the 2 years since Dad's death and everything that had changed. I'd gone from feeling expendable to understanding my own value. I'd traveled the world and found pieces of myself in distant places. I'd set boundaries that felt cruel to people who'd never respected any boundaries before. I'd learned that choosing yourself wasn't selfish, it was survival. And I'd built a life so different from what I'd imagined that sometimes I still had moments of disbelief that this was actually my reality. Back in Oregon, I finally made the decision about the Portugal property. Bought it, signed papers from my deck overlooking the Pacific while acquiring a view of the Atlantic, and started planning renovations that would make it livable for extended stays. It felt extravagant and practical simultaneously, giving myself options for where to be without having to choose just one place forever. I could split my time, follow good weather and interesting opportunities, remain untethered in the way that felt like freedom rather than instability. The changes to Mom's trust that Patricia had warned me about went through. Mom called to tell me, her voice careful and apologetic, explaining that she felt she needed to provide for Victoria in a way that gave her security. I listened without arguing, without trying to change her mind. That's your choice, Mom. Your money, your decision. She seemed surprised by my acceptance, maybe had expected a fight. You're not upset? No, I said honestly. Dad gave me more than enough. What you do with your estate doesn't affect me. If Victoria needs that to feel secure, that's between you and her. There was a long pause. You've really let go of us, haven't you? It wasn't quite a question. I've let go of needing you to be different than you are, I corrected. That's not the same as letting go of you. You're my mother. Victoria's my sister. But I'm not going to keep hurting myself trying to earn love from people who only know how to give it conditionally. She cried a little on the phone, and we ended the call awkwardly but not badly. I knew I might never have the mother-son relationship I'd wanted as a kid, but I had something more honest now, something built on reality rather than hope. That had to be enough because it was all that was available. I thought about reaching out to Victoria, some part of me still holding space for the possibility of reconciliation, but I knew it was pointless. She'd made me the villain in her story, and nothing I did would change that narrative because she needed it to maintain her self-image. Instead, I focused on the relationships that actually worked, that felt reciprocal and genuine. Jordan and his family, who invited me to be the godfather of their new daughter, and who seemed genuinely happy to have me in their lives. My coastal neighbors and conservation group friends who knew me as just Marcus and liked me for who I was now. Kate, who flew back to Oregon for 3 weeks and stayed at my place while conducting more research, our relationship deepening into something that felt sustainable and real. On the 2nd anniversary of Dad's death, I drove to the cemetery again. It was becoming a ritual, this annual visit where I'd update him on my life and thank him for the gift that kept giving long after the money had been distributed. I told him about Portugal and Kate and the life I was building across continents. I told him the company was doing well, that I was honoring his legacy without being trapped by it. I told him I'd forgiven him, truly forgiven him, because holding on to that resentment only hurt me. As I walked back to my car, I passed a family visiting a nearby grave. 3 generations gathered around a headstone with flowers and photographs, and the kind of casual affection that suggested they actually liked spending time together. I felt a small pang of grief for what I'd never had, but it was distant now, more observation than wound. Not everyone got that kind of family. Some of us had to build our families from friends and partners and chosen connections. That wasn't worse, just different. Driving home along the coastal highway with the ocean stretching infinite to my left, I thought about the Marcus who'd existed before that funeral exclusion email. He'd been so focused on being good enough, on earning his place, on proving his worth through endless service and reliability. He'd thought if he just tried hard enough, eventually someone would notice and value him appropriately. That version of me had been exhausting to inhabit, constantly performing and never resting, always one crisis away from being needed and never quite important enough to be celebrated. This Marcus, the one. Driving home to a house he'd chosen in a life he'd designed with money left by a father who'd finally seen him clearly, was different. Not better necessarily, but freer. More honest. More willing to disappoint people who'd never appreciated him anyway. more committed to his own joy than to everyone else's comfort. It had taken 42 years and an inheritance and burning down the family mythology, but I'd finally become the person I was always supposed to be. My phone rang as I pulled into my driveway. Kate calling from New Zealand where it was already tomorrow. "Hey," she said when I answered. "Just wanted to hear your voice." We talked while I walked through my house, out to the deck, settling into my usual chair with the view I'd never gotten tired of. She told me about her day, I told her about the cemetery visit, and we made plans for my next trip to see her. When we hung up, I sat there holding my phone and feeling something I'd spent most of my life not believing I deserved. Contentment. Joy. Peace. The knowledge that I'd chosen right over and over, until the choosing became natural and the life became real. The sun was setting again, like it did every evening, reliable and beautiful and completely indifferent to human drama. I thought about pouring wine but decided on coffee instead, wanted to stay present rather than softening the edges. Tomorrow I'd work on the consulting project that was challenging me in good ways. Next week I'd fly to Seattle for Jordan's daughter's christening. Next month I'd return to New Zealand. Next year I'd spend time in Portugal, learning new rhythms in new places. But right now I was here on my deck in my life completely and finally myself. No performance, no obligation, no compromise. Just Marcus Sullivan at 44, finally understanding that the best inheritance his father could have left him wasn't the money or the property or the business shares. It was permission. Permission to choose himself, to be selfish, to walk away from people who couldn't love him the way he deserved. And he'd taken that permission and built something his father never managed to build. A life based on authenticity rather than appearance, on joy rather than achievement, on being enough exactly as he was. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.